Some individuals have never found money to be a concern, simply because it's never been part of their reality. They exist in a world where the things we deem important often go unnoticed. And you know what? They aren't bothered by what you possess or how much money you have. Why? Because they've never had a need for it. But what happens when someone carries secrets so powerful they have the potential to shock the world? When Frank Fritz was discovered dead in his bathroom, no one could have anticipated the shocking discovery behind the old garage door. Hidden away was a priceless collection worth millions. Over 75 vintage motorcycles, including a rare 1947 Indian Chief prototype valued at $250,000. Among the treasures was a long-forgotten Aerosmith vehicle and a Yoda prototype from Star Wars that George Lucas had believed to be destroyed. But that was only the beginning. The most staggering revelation wasn't the treasure itself, but the handwritten journals that unveiled the chilling truth about Frank's final days. Are you prepared to uncover the hidden truths behind the screen? Drop a comment with the number 1 if you feel for Frank Fritz, or the number 0 if you see things differently. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss out on the shocking revelations in today's story. Many people have never had money, and for them, it's never been necessary. That's why we often feel rejected, because honestly, they don't care about those things. They don't care about your money. They've never had it, and never will. When Frank Fritz was found dead on his bathroom floor, no one could have fathomed what lay hidden in his garage. A secret collection worth millions, more than 75 vintage motorcycles, including a one-of-a-kind 1947 Indian Chief prototype valued at $250,000. Aerosmith's lost tour bus, and a Star Wars Yoda prototype that George Lucas had believed was destroyed. But the most shocking revelation wasn't the treasure. It was the handwritten journals that exposed the grim truth about his final days. Why was Frank Fritz really kicked off American pickers, and who tried to steal his $6 million fortune? Frank Fritz was born in Davenport, Iowa in 1963, and even as a child, he stood apart from the other kids. While most children were riding bikes or swapping baseball cards, Frank filled his room with rocks, coins, stamps, and even old beer cans. The young boy collected things that others barely noticed. His parents, Bill and Susan, thought it was just a quirky habit. But for Frank, there was something special about these forgotten items, something worth preserving. He once mentioned that he even collected paper clips from his school notebooks. It went that far. Frank was also intrigued by razor blades, which seemed odd at the time, but revealed his unique ability to spot value in the most unlikely places. As he got older, Frank attended Sodalo High School and later Bettendorf High School, where he met Mike Wolf. They hit it off in 8th grade, and not long after, they began their treasure hunts together on weekends, scouring garage sales and flea markets. The two boys were drawn to the same passion. Strange, dusty, forgotten objects each carry their own story. While some teachers believed Frank had the potential to thrive with a traditional education, he chose a different route. College wasn't where he thought he would gain the most valuable lessons. For Frank, true knowledge came from experience, by handling old items, uncovering their history, and learning what made them truly valuable. After graduating high school, Frank took a job as a fire inspector, overseeing large areas of Iowa. He stayed in the role for nearly 25 years, but his passion for collecting never faded. In fact, it only grew stronger. As a teenager, Frank started buying motorcycles. At just 16 years old, he purchased a 1964 Harley-Davidson for over $4,000, a substantial sum at the time. His parents were stunned. But to Frank, it wasn't just a bike, it was a piece of history. He worked hard at places like Quad City Automatic Sprinkler and Coast to Coast Hardware to fund his growing passion. Over time, Frank accumulated more than 100 vintage motorcycles, eventually building a barn to house them all. Each year, he attended the Sturgis Motorcycle Rally in South Dakota, becoming a well-known figure in the biker community long before his TV debut. What set Frank apart wasn't just the sheer number of items he collected, it was how he collected them. He had what he called the eye of a picker. Frank could step into an old warehouse or attic and immediately spot the treasures others overlooked. For years, Frank explored dusty buildings, carefully documenting the places where he found intriguing items, always wondering about the lives of the people who once owned them. He didn't just collect objects, he collected their stories. This unique approach transformed him from a mere collector into someone who saw every find as a piece of history, saved from being discarded. Even in his role as a fire inspector, Frank's passion for collecting never waned. While inspecting old buildings, he often came across forgotten treasures, fire helmets, alarm bells, antique tools. These weren't just obsolete items, they were fragments of the past. And Frank had an uncanny ability to spot them. His inspections became more than just work. They were opportunities to uncover history. These were treasure hunts disguised as safety reports and fire regulations. Over time, the unique blend of his two roles, daytime fire inspector and passionate picker, transformed him into the expert he would become. His inspection work sharpened his attention to detail, teaching him to read a building like a map, to recognize what others overlooked. This skill would prove invaluable in his quest for forgotten treasures. That skill also became invaluable when Frank began searching antique stores or warehouses for hidden treasures. He didn't rely on luck, he had a system. Years of scanning walls and inspecting hazards had trained him to spot what others missed. This edge proved crucial later on American Pickers as he sifted through piles of discarded items, always searching for something of true value. There was one pivotal moment that changed everything. Frank bought a simple item for just $15 and sold it for $475. That sale stayed with him, but it wasn't just the profit. It was the realization. It was the moment he understood that his knowledge had real value. After years of studying these objects, he had finally found a way for it to pay off. That deal was a turning point, showing Frank that his passion could be turned into a real business. From that moment on, he began to view collecting in a new light, not just as a hobby, but as a way to build something much bigger. In 2002, Frank took a bold step. He left his fire inspection job behind and opened a store called Frank's Finds in Savannah, Illinois. But it wasn't just a store. It felt more like a small museum, filled with firefighting gear, antique tools, and relics that most people had forgotten even existed. The building itself carried its own history. An old opera house with a bar, stepping inside felt like entering a time capsule. While some visitors remarked that it smelled musty and looked dim, to Frank that only added to its charm. This was Frank's world, raw, authentic, and full of character. Over the years, the store became a magnet for collectors and curious tourists. People flocked to see the strange and fascinating items on display. Not everyone appreciated the setup. Some found it difficult to navigate. But those who understood Frank's vision could see the value in it. The store, along with everything it contained, became the foundation for the next chapter of his life. When television came calling, Frank was ready. He didn't need to put on a persona. All he had to do was be himself, the guy who could see treasures where others saw trash, and who never stopped believing that every object had a story waiting to be told. Before American Pickers became a TV sensation, Mike Wolfe had already been hunting down old treasures, camera in hand. Around 2002, he began filming his adventures. At that same time, his longtime friend Frank Fritz had just walked away from his fire inspection job and opened his own antique shop in Savannah, Illinois. Frank was content running his shop, filled with vintage motorcycles, oil cans, and old toys. He had no desire to hit the road, but Mike had a vision. Mike believed their treasure hunting trips had the potential to become something much bigger, and he spent months trying to convince Frank to join him. Frank wasn't sure. He liked the store. It was steady, and it was his. But then, one day, something changed. Frank purchased a small pin from a fraternity group for $115. At first glance, it didn't seem like much. But when he later sold it for $450, that moment sparked something inside him. A rush he compared to the thrill of gambling. That feeling, combined with Mike's relentless encouragement, finally convinced Frank to give it a shot. He locked up his shop, packed his things, and hit the road with Mike. The early trips, filmed on the go, became the raw footage that eventually caught the eye of television producers. When American Pickers premiered in January 2010, everything changed. Frank went from being a quiet shop owner to a familiar face millions of people tuned in to watch every week. The first episode attracted over 3 million viewers, one of the biggest premieres in History Channel's history. With his beard, solid build, and calm demeanor, Frank was the perfect contrast to Mike's energetic personality. Audiences loved him for that balance. In no time, fans were lining up just to catch a glimpse of them in person. That October, they visited the California Surf Museum, where a massive crowd gathered outside. Frank, puzzled, asked, "What are all these people doing here?" But he stayed, signing autographs until there was no one left to sign for. Just 8 months after the show's premiere, one of their episodes reached 5.3 million viewers. Frank had officially become a star. Their early trips were carefree adventures. They drove around in a white Mercedes truck, then switched to a Ford Transit with no specific plan in mind. In September 2011, while passing through southern Maine, they stumbled upon Champion Auto in Arundel. The owner, Mario Burnett, was utterly shocked. He had watched the show every week, and now the stars were standing in his own yard. Frank picked up oil cans, signs, and gas station memorabilia, while Mike focused on motorcycle gear. They spent 5 days exploring the area, completely unscripted, simply following the trail and meeting people along the way. That was the magic of it all. 2 friends in a truck chasing the past. One of the key reasons American Pickers worked so well was because Frank and Mike complemented each other perfectly. Mike, tall and lean, was full of energy and excitement, while Frank, shorter and calmer, was more methodical in his approach. Mike had a passion for old bicycles and Volkswagens, whereas Frank gravitated towards toys, oil cans, and motorcycle memorabilia. When they picked through Mario's place in Maine, it was obvious. Mike focused on motorcycle items, while Frank zeroed in on gas station signs. They fit together like puzzle pieces. Mike once called Frank a dreamer, sensitive, humorous, and thoughtful. Fans saw that dynamic too, and they loved the quirky chemistry between the duo. Some related to Frank's careful, deliberate style, while others connected more with Mike's fast-paced approach. This balance made the show feel more personal and relatable. Frank's passion for motorcycles began long before the show. As a teenager, he bought a 1964 Harley-Davidson, which likely gave his parents some concern. That was just the beginning. Over the years, Frank built a collection of around 35 vintage bikes, carefully stored in a warehouse that resembled a museum. Frank's collection included rare Indian motorcycles, including a 1938 four-cylinder bike he discovered in a warehouse in Philadelphia. He also had a variety of British bikes: Vincent, BSA, Triumph. One of his most prized possessions was the Von Dutch XAVW, a 1942 Harley with a frame powered by a Volkswagen engine, custom painted by Von Dutch himself. Frank had first seen it in a magazine decades earlier and was stunned when he later found it at a garage sale. That bike, like many others in his collection, told a story, and that was what mattered most to Frank. In 2013, he decided to share his knowledge with others by writing a book titled How to Pick Vintage Motorcycles. It wasn't just for experts. Frank wrote it for anyone who loved bikes or wanted to start collecting. The book was packed with tips, stories, and images from his own discoveries. He covered everything from how to find a deal and negotiate to what to look for in a hidden gem. His writing style was simple, humorous, and clear, just like his personality on TV. For Frank, the book was a way to pass on everything he had learned over the years. He wanted people to not only understand the history behind these machines, but also experience the same thrill he felt when bringing one back to life. Frank's previous career as a fire inspector had a significant influence on one of his passions: fire department memorabilia. After spending 25 years inspecting buildings, he had access to places most collectors would never dream of seeing: abandoned firehouses, old fire stations, and outdated equipment. It was all there, waiting for someone with the right eye to find it. Frank began collecting everything he could get his hands on, turning his unique access into an incredible treasure trove of fire department history. Brass fire extinguishers, leather helmets, old alarm systems. Frank had an eye for it all. Even on American pickers, you could see his face light up whenever they stumbled upon something related to fire. For him, it wasn't just another category to collect. It was personal. What set Frank apart was how he viewed collecting. He didn't just see objects. He saw the stories they carried, the history, the lives, and the moments behind each item. Every item Frank came across held a memory of a time, a place, or a person. He often spent more time discussing the history of the item with the seller than negotiating the price. Frank was particularly drawn to things that revealed how Americans once lived: old tools, forgotten products, quirky toys. He treated war memorabilia with profound respect, even going so far as to donate items to museums if they were connected to soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice. That was Frank, a man who saw more than just value in objects. He saw the history they carried. Frank believed that the stories behind objects should be preserved, not hidden away. But behind the scenes, Frank Fritz spent much of his life battling something most people never saw. For over 36 years, he lived with Crohn's disease, a painful and exhausting condition that made everyday life a challenge, especially during the filming of American Pickers. His close friend revealed that Frank had been coping with the disease since he was around 25 or 30 years old. Despite the constant pain, Frank pushed through, appearing on TV for millions to see, all while keeping his struggle hidden. Things improved when he stopped drinking and focused on maintaining sobriety, but the years of stress and illness eventually took a heavy toll. His health began to deteriorate, and in the end, it became too much for his body to handle. When Frank passed away at 60, many didn't realize the extent of the suffering he had endured behind the scenes. It wasn't until 2017 that the public began to learn more about his struggles. That year, Frank was pulled over by police for driving the wrong way. He admitted to drinking and taking Xanax, a medication prescribed to treat his anxiety. He failed the sobriety test and was charged with driving under the influence. Later, he opened up about the source of his anxiety, living under constant scrutiny, always feeling judged. The pressure of being watched at every turn weighed heavily on him. Frank avoided jail time by accepting a plea deal, but his reputation was already damaged. Frank Fritz endured countless struggles that remained hidden until the truth finally came to light. His life was far from easy, and the challenges he faced are a story that few truly understand. Do you empathize with the immense pressure he went through? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to uncover more fascinating and heartfelt secrets. That moment lifted the veil and revealed that fame didn't just break Frank down, it changed him. His friendship with co-star Mike Wolfe began to deteriorate. By 2021, Frank admitted they hadn't spoken in 2 years. What truly hurt him wasn't the lack of work, but the silence. After undergoing back surgery, Mike never reached out. Frank felt that the show was always lopsided, with Mike being treated as the star while he was just the sidekick. He even joked that it was like being in a band with Steven Tyler. You'll never be the lead. When Mike posted an online message about missing Frank, Frank didn't buy it. He called it fake, suggesting that maybe someone else had written it. He didn't believe that Mike had ever said anything kind about him in real life. However, after years of tension and distance, the two finally reunited in May 2023, over Memorial Day weekend. A mutual friend played a crucial role in bringing them back together. But the pain didn't end there. During the pandemic, Frank injured his back while moving something at home. He needed surgery, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Lockdowns, isolation, and personal struggles all collided at once. That's when he became addicted to opioids. Initially, it was to manage the pain, but soon it spiraled out of control. Mike Wolfe described it as watching a storm destroy someone. They tried to help, even staging an intervention, desperately urging him to get clean. Frank insisted he was fine, but deep down he wasn't. When the show wanted Frank back, they asked for a clean drug test. Unfortunately, he couldn't pass it. That was the final blow to his time on American Pickers. Frank's last episode aired in March 2020. At first, it seemed like he just needed some time to rest and recover. He even claimed afterward that he never truly left. He had back surgery, and then the COVID-19 pandemic hit. However, by July 2021, Mike confirmed that Frank would not be returning to the show. Mike posted a message wishing Frank all the best, but that was the extent of it. Behind the scenes, things were much more complicated. Frank had undergone major surgery. 185 stitches and 2 metal rods were placed in his spine. He insisted he was fully recovered and ready to return to work. However, the network had different plans. They didn't bring him back. According to those close to him, that decision devastated him. He felt forgotten, pushed aside. From that moment on, his health continued to deteriorate. Frank Fritz's life took a tragic turn on July 14, 2022. That morning, a friend entered Frank's farm in Iowa and found him lying on the floor, unresponsive and unable to speak. The friend immediately called 911, suspecting he might be having a seizure. Frank, at 59 years old, had suffered a severe stroke. Doctors rushed him to the hospital, but the damage to his brain was extensive. He had lost most of his ability to move and think clearly. After a month in the hospital, he was transferred to a nursing home to continue his recovery. That was only the beginning of a long and painful battle for survival. Even when Frank was finally able to return home, he still required constant care. His health continued to deteriorate, leading to several emergency calls. One particularly serious incident involving pneumonia that required another hospital stay. As the weeks passed, it became evident that Frank no longer had control over his life or finances. The once independent man had been stripped of his ability to manage his affairs, and the toll of his health struggles was undeniable. In August 2022, the court stepped in and appointed Frank's friend, Chris Davis, to make personal decisions on his behalf. A bank was also assigned to manage his assets, which were valued at approximately $6 million. Court documents made it clear that Frank could no longer care for himself. He was unable to ensure he had food, housing, or even basic medical services. Without assistance, he was at serious risk of injury or death. But even with help, things remained challenging. Both the Guardian and the bank faced ongoing scrutiny from the court. Judges reviewed their actions every year to ensure that Frank was being properly cared for, adding another layer of pressure to the already difficult situation. Then there was the cost. Frank had earned millions during his time on American Pickers, but his savings quickly dwindled. He was spending around $30,000 a month on medical care, more than $350,000 a year in total. His only source of income at the time was about $60,000 a year from investments, but that wasn't nearly enough. Frank required 24-hour nursing care, special equipment, physical therapy, and treatment for other serious conditions, including Crohn's disease and COPD. The financial strain was overwhelming, and it became clear that the costs of his care were unsustainable. Frank's close friend Jerry Jandro revealed that there were even discussions about auctioning off Frank's antiques after he passed away. "I think he'd do really well with an auction," Jerry said, noting that Frank's fan community would likely support it. As time went on, Frank's condition worsened. Jerry described visiting him as heartbreaking. One side of Frank's body had completely stopped functioning. He would try to lift his arm, but it would just drop, Jerry recalled. Even more painful was the fact that Frank was fully aware of what was happening to him. He knew how much he had deteriorated. He couldn't speak like he used to. He couldn't move, and he couldn't change his situation. Jerry believed Frank had lost the will to fight. "When people get tired," he said, "they often lose the will to live." "I truly think he could have lived longer if he hadn't given up," Jerry said. Then, the final call came. On September 30th, 2024, Mike Wolfe, Frank's longtime co-star on American Pickers, was informed that Frank's condition had taken a turn for the worse. Mike immediately rushed to his side. He stayed with Frank for an hour, holding his hand, rubbing his chest, and whispering to him. It was a final moment of comfort, a bittersweet farewell to a friendship that had shaped both their lives. "I told him I wasn't mad at him," Mike said. "I told him I loved him." Just before Frank took his final breath, Mike whispered a last message to him. "Go find your mother. Go find her." At 8:50 p.m., Frank passed away. Mike was there, holding his friend's hand until the very end. Frank's mother and her closest friend, Annette Overberlander, were also by his side. Annette later shared that Mike had never stopped being there for Frank throughout his struggles. He was with him in his final moments, just as both Frank and Mike had always hoped it would be. When Frank Fritz passed away in September 2024, no one could have predicted what would be discovered behind the old garage door. Hidden from the public for years was something truly remarkable. More than 75 vintage motorcycles, each one with its own story, each a piece of history. Some looked as though they had just rolled off the factory floor, while others were covered in dust, rusted, and clearly waiting for a second chance. The oldest bike dated back to 1912, and among them were rare prototypes that experts believed had been lost to time. Most people had no idea Frank had quietly amassed such an incredible collection. Only a few close friends knew the full extent of what Frank had kept hidden. But once the news spread, collectors and museums from around the world were abuzz. Many experts believed this could be one of the most significant motorcycle discoveries in decades. As people examined the collection more closely, the details became even more astonishing. One bike, the 1922 Ace 4, had been bought for just $45,000 in a memorable episode of American Pickers, but its true value had skyrocketed since then. The discovery only deepened the mystery of Frank's secret trove of treasures. Now, the 1922 Ace 4 is worth nearly $200,000. Another standout in the collection is the 1939 Indian 4, nicknamed the Aristocrat, valued at over $115,000. Frank also had a number of pre-war Indian Scouts, including a rare 1928 model with its original paint still intact. He owned 3 1950s Harley-Davidson Panhead models, each at a different stage of restoration. But the biggest surprise of all was a one-of-a-kind 1947 Indian Chief prototype. Its design was unlike any other known model, and experts believe it could be worth over $250,000. However, the motorcycles weren't the only thing that made this collection extraordinary. Alongside the motorcycles were handwritten journals, dozens of them, carefully preserved for over 30 years. Frank had written down everything, where each motorcycle came from, who had owned them before, and the parts he had to track down. He even detailed the struggles of restoring some bikes, the long hours spent in the shop, and the immense satisfaction he felt when a bike finally roared to life. Sometimes, he added small personal notes, reflecting on how a particular trip made him feel, or what it reminded him of. These journals transformed the collection from mere machinery into a narrative. And for collectors, that made everything even more valuable. By the time the full inventory was completed, experts estimated that Frank's collection could be worth over $2 million. Some even believed it could surpass $3 million once the auction started, especially with Frank's name attached to everything. Auction houses eagerly vied for the chance to handle the sale, knowing this wasn't just about buying old motorcycles. It was about owning a piece of American history, carefully preserved by a man who truly understood its value. The collection had become more than just an assortment of bikes. It was a legacy, and the demand for it reflected the profound impact Frank's passion had on the world of collectors. But Frank's love for history extended far beyond motorcycles. Hidden within the estate was an old, beat-up truck that, at first glance, seemed unremarkable. However, this wasn't just any truck. It was the very one that Aerosmith used in their early days, driving from show to show when they were still an unknown band. Frank and Mike Wolf had discovered it in the Massachusetts woods in 2018, purchased it for $25,000, and restored it. When the band saw it again in 2019, they were absolutely stunned. Joe Perry called it incredible, and Ray Tabino, one of the original members, became emotional as he recalled the days when the band would scrape together a few bucks for gas and tolls. That truck hadn't just carried their gear, it had carried their dreams. Then there were the other oddities in Frank's collection. One of the most unusual items was a giant elephant head that he bought from a taxidermy collector for $9,500. The head later ended up in the hands of Jack White of the White Stripes, who traded antiques and cash to own it, partly due to the connection with his famous album, Elephant. The transaction sparked controversy among animal rights groups, but it also highlighted Frank's boldness in collecting things that others wouldn't even consider. Frank didn't shy away from the strange or the unconventional. He was always willing to collect the items that told unique stories, no matter how unusual they might seem. Frank also owned an original jelly car from the early 1900s, a vehicle that had once been used to advertise the dessert in small towns across the country. Like many of his rare finds, that jelly car eventually found its way into a museum. Whether it was music, food, or quirky American relics, Frank had an incredible eye for what mattered. He even delved into the world of sci-fi collectibles. In one memorable episode of American Pickers, he and Mike uncovered 4 original Yoda prototypes from Star Wars. At first, they appeared to be nothing more than fan art, but a former Lucasfilm artist confirmed their authenticity. Frank's ability to spot hidden treasures, no matter the category, was unmatched. The Yoda prototypes were based on original designs from 1978 and molded after a model inspired by Albert Einstein. Frank got an incredible deal on them, and each one eventually ended up being worth over $6,000. This discovery is proof that Frank's passion for collecting wasn't confined to just motorcycles and signs. He understood that pop culture held its own power and value. Frank had a unique ability to recognize the significance of items, whether they were linked to history, entertainment, or the quirks of American life. But just as everyone was celebrating Frank's legacy, a legal storm broke out. In February 2025, his father, William Bill Fritz, filed a lawsuit claiming that the will submitted in 2023 was a forgery. According to Bill, Frank had never signed it. This will left nearly all of Frank's $6 million estate to his friends and caregivers, excluding Bill entirely. He argued that he was Frank's only true family, the sole surviving relative, and that he deserved everything. The legal battle over Frank's estate quickly became a high-profile and contentious issue, casting a shadow over the celebration of his life and legacy. Court records indicated that a jury trial would be necessary to settle the matter. The case quickly became more complex. Frank had suffered a severe stroke in 2022 and was placed under guardianship shortly afterward. A judge at the time had ruled that Frank was incapable of making decisions for himself, and that ruling became the crux of Bill's argument. If Frank couldn't care for himself, Bill argued, how could he have signed a legal will? Adding fuel to the fire, Bill claimed that he had been kept away from his son during his final years. He contended that they had shared time together, even going fishing in St. Thomas, and that he had been unjustly pushed aside. Now, the court would have to determine what was true and what wasn't, as the legal battle over Frank's estate became increasingly contentious. As the evidence was presented, everyone anxiously awaited how this chapter in Frank Fritz's story would conclude. But one thing was certain: Frank had left behind more than just antiques and motorcycles. He had created a legacy founded on passion, memories, and a profound love for history. Whether in a rusted engine or an old truck, Frank saw stories that were worth preserving. And now, the world was finally beginning to see them too, recognizing the deeper value in his collection and the unique perspective he brought to the art of collecting. What do you think about Frank's legacy and the incredible items he left behind? How do you feel about his life and his passion for collecting? Leave a comment with the number 1 if you sympathize with Frank Fritz, or the number 0 if you have a different opinion. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting video. See you in the next one. You won't believe what the FBI uncovered beneath Frank Fritz's old floorboards. It started as a routine search, but quickly escalated into a shocking incident when agents stumbled upon a secret hidden for years in the American picker star's home. Was it a rare antique, a dark secret, or something that left the entire investigation team stunned? Stay tuned to the end to uncover the chilling truth behind this discovery. Make sure to hit that like button, share with friends, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on this jaw-dropping discovery. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Let's dive right in. Don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this. A new medical report has revealed a shocking truth. Frank Fritz had a lethal amount of drugs in his system at the time of his death. According to prosecutors, this was no accident. It was deliberate poisoning. And the person arrested is none other than his former partner, Wolf. The idea that Wolf would poison someone he once trusted completely is not only unthinkable, but utterly ruthless. The case has stunned not only the American Pickers fan community, but the entire entertainment world, where the bond between TV stars was once considered unbreakable. Previously, many viewers believed the tension between Fritz and Wolf was merely a publicity stunt to boost attention and ratings. But now, things have spiraled beyond imagination. Wolf has been accused of murder, with motives allegedly rooted in greed and revenge. In the early days of the case, social media reports claimed the charges against Wolf had been dropped, while investigators continued to gather evidence. Despite the compelling nature of the case, the lack of concrete evidence has prevented it from ever being fully resolved. It wasn't until a member of the American Pickers production crew revealed that he saw Wolf at Fritz's house on the night of the incident that the case truly exploded. Iowa State Police conducted a thorough investigation and uncovered shocking evidence. Wolf's fingerprints on pill bottles at the scene and suspicious text messages sent to Fritz. These findings led to a first-degree murder charge, fueling deep suspicions that Fritz's death was not an accident, but a deliberate act. The investigation began when a forensic expert noticed discrepancies in the toxicology report. The initial cause of death was reported as complications from a stroke, but the autopsy revealed a dangerously high level of drugs in Fritz's system, far exceeding the prescribed dosage for his condition. This was particularly suspicious because Fritz was known to strictly adhere to his recovery regimen. Forensic experts determined that the drugs in Fritz's body could only have come from external interference. Authorities investigated those who had contact with Fritz in his final hours, and what they uncovered stunned even seasoned detectives. Neighborhood security cameras captured Wolf's car arriving at Fritz's house late at night, just 3 hours before emergency services were called. It was Wolf who made the 911 call that night, claiming he had checked on his old friend and found Fritz unresponsive. However, this very detail sparked controversy and prompted investigators to re-examine the entire history between the two men. When paramedics arrived at the scene, they found Frank Fritz unresponsive with no pulse. All efforts to revive him failed, and he was pronounced dead at the scene. Initially, the cause of death was attributed to complications from a prior stroke. However, toxicology results told a different story, prompting investigators to dig deeper and uncovering a dark secret no one could have anticipated. Immediately, investigators turned their attention to Mike Wolf and the hidden motives behind his longtime friend's death. What particularly caught their notice was Wolf's suspicious behavior following Fritz's passing. Instead of mourning or honoring his old friend, Wolf quickly moved to gain control of Fritz's personal collection and intellectual property. Within less than 48 hours, he contacted Fritz's lawyer to discuss using Fritz's name and likeness for American Pickers' commercial products. The investigation led detectives to search Wolf's home and office, where they discovered a hidden safe containing unlabeled pill bottles, later identified as matching the substance found in Fritz's system. But the most striking find was a journal in Wolf's travel bag, filled with entries revealing his growing anger toward Fritz. Some entries dated back years, but their tone became increasingly hostile. One entry, written just weeks before Fritz's death, read, "F thinks he can waltz back in and take half the glory. He forgets that without me the show wouldn't exist. He's a burden." Throughout the 6-week trial, Wolf remained eerily calm, sitting silently beside his attorney. Prosecutors described how he meticulously planned Fritz's murder. Evidence showed Wolf had researched undetectable poisons and methods to make a death appear as a natural health complication. His internet search history included queries like, "Can drug interactions causing a stroke be detected after death?" and "How to make a death look like complications from a stroke." These searches were far from coincidental, suggesting a carefully orchestrated plot. The prosecution argued that Wolf used Fritz's medical history as the perfect cover to conceal a murder driven by resentment and greed. Witnesses, including crew members, testified about the growing rift between the two. A production assistant recalled heated arguments about the show's future, with Wolf demanding full creative control and telling Fritz he was no longer a co-host due to his health issues. The most emotional testimony at the trial came from Danielle Colby, a longtime friend of both Fritz and Wolf. In tears, she reluctantly sided with the prosecution, recounting a memorable confrontation with Wolf about his treatment of Fritz. "I started noticing Mike seemed obsessed with being the sole face of American Pickers," she said, choking up. "When I asked him if he'd consider reconciling with Frank, Mike got defensive and angry. He told me, 'Stay out of things that don't concern you.'" Colby revealed she had found disturbing notes in Wolf's office about Fritz's medication schedule. When she confronted him, Wolf coldly responded that he was concerned for Frank's health. However, given the long-standing tension between the two, these notes only fueled suspicion. The defense tried to portray Wolf and Fritz's relationship as a misunderstood friendship, arguing that Wolf had attempted to mend things before Fritz's death. They called network executives who claimed Wolf publicly supported Fritz's recovery. However, this argument was swiftly undermined by Fritz's personal physician, who confirmed that Fritz was planning to open a new antique shop and had never taken the dangerous drug dosage Wolf was alleged to have administered. When directly asked if he had given Fritz the drugs, Wolf, who had remained composed throughout the trial, suddenly lost control. He shouted at the prosecutor, "You don't understand! You don't know what it's like to build something from nothing, only to see someone else take credit and smile for the cameras like they mattered to the show's success as much as I did." The outburst forced a brief recess, but the damage was done. A juror later said it was the defining moment, revealing the deep-seated resentment Wolf had harbored for years after Fritz's departure from the show. A financial motive soon came to light. Forensic accountants testified that Wolf had quietly restructured their company, transferring intellectual property rights to himself in the event of Fritz's incapacitation or death. Wolf had also taken out a $5 million business insurance policy, with his company as the beneficiary. Prosecutors further revealed that Wolf had set up multiple shell companies, funneling over $2 million worth of antiques without Fritz's consent. The jury took only 4 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. As the judge sentenced Wolf to life in prison without parole, the courtroom erupted into chaos. Wolf, who had remained composed throughout the 6-week trial, suddenly stood and shouted, "Don't you get it? He was going to ruin everything! He was going to destroy the legacy I built!" He lunged over the defense table, throwing papers and a water glass, then charged toward Fritz's family, flailing angrily before court security subdued him. The courtroom descended into pandemonium as shouts filled the air, with people scrambling in panic as Wolf briefly broke free and lunged forward again. The most shocking moment came when Wolf glared at Danielle Colby, who sat silently in the gallery, and yelled, "Tell them the truth about who Frank really was!" Colby turned away, visibly pained, as several crew members began to cry. The American Pickers family was utterly fractured, deeply divided by the trial. Some still sided with Wolf, while others bravely testified against him. Court documents revealed that Wolf had secretly manipulated the production team behind the scenes, turning them against Fritz. Years of conflict and tension boiled over, and as security struggled to regain control, Wolf continued shouting, revealing even more shocking details. He had planned to start his own show, claiming Fritz was useless and that the network wanted him back. Reporters in the courtroom described the scene as surreal and chaotic, with at least 3 people injured, including Wolf's defense attorney, who was hit by a thrown water bottle during the melee. Even as he was dragged from the courtroom, Wolf kept screaming about betrayal and the legacy he claimed had been stolen from him. The courtroom outburst dealt a fatal blow to Wolf's hopes for an appeal. The image his defense team had crafted of a calm, misunderstood businessman was shattered. In the aftermath, a wave of Wolf's former colleagues came forward, revealing previously unknown aspects of his true nature. Thomas Reynolds, a former American Pickers producer, recalled Wolf's intense outbursts behind the scenes whenever things didn't go his way. "He was always charming on camera," Reynolds shared. "But off camera, Wolf could be terrifying, especially to younger staff." Others corroborated that Wolf had grown increasingly paranoid, believing Fritz was planning a TV comeback with a rival show. The case not only shocked those involved, but sent ripples through the reality TV community. American Pickers, a global TV phenomenon with millions of viewers, now faces an uncertain future. The History Channel removed all episodes featuring Mike Wolf and issued a statement expressing shock and condolences to Frank Fritz's family. Several major sponsors have also pulled out, leaving the show's fate more precarious than ever. Fritz's family filed a lawsuit to gain control of Frank's antique collection and intellectual property, vowing to protect his legacy. They accused the network of enabling Wolf's increasingly erratic behavior over the years. Psychologists suggest that Mike Wolf may have suffered from narcissistic personality disorder, a condition that can present as charming and friendly on the surface, but harbors deep resentment underneath. This isn't just a fight over assets, but deep family secrets, unresolved conflicts, and life-changing decisions. What do you think about this struggle? Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and let us know what stories you'd like to hear next. Be sure to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more exciting content. We won't disappoint you. Dr. Robert Keller, a forensic psychologist who closely followed the trial, stated that Fritz's departure from the show likely caused a severe narcissistic injury to Wolf. However, what alarmed prosecutors most was how Wolf used his celebrity status to manipulate public perception. Shortly after Frank Fritz's death, Wolf appeared on social media in tears, claiming his best friend had died from stroke complications, while seizing the opportunity to promote a memorial product bearing Frank's name. Prosecutor Sarah Donovan asserted, "This wasn't just a murder. It was a deliberate deception aimed at millions of viewers mourning a man, unaware that the person shedding tears was the one who killed him and profited from their grief." Subsequent investigations revealed that over $1 million was raised in the weeks following Fritz's death, with most of the funds funneled into accounts accessible only to Wolf. As Mike Wolf begins his life behind bars, fans and viewers worldwide remain in shock. Robert Jenkins, a loyal fan of the show, shared, "We invited him into our homes every week. We believed in the honesty, passion, and desire to preserve history he portrayed. To learn it was all a facade is heartbreaking." Many TV personalities who worked with Wolf have publicly distanced themselves from him. Some expressed profound shock and urged the public to honor the memory of Frank Fritz, whom they consider the true victim. For the American Pickers crew, the tragedy is far from over. Trial testimony revealed a deeply divided production team, with some still believing in Wolf's innocence while others are convinced of his guilt. A show that once symbolized a passion for history and human connection now lies in tatters, a television empire undone by its own leader. Danielle Colby, who testified in court as a witness for the prosecution, has since taken a leave of absence from television. She expressed a need for time to heal and reflect, and has asked for privacy. She also expressed hope that the legacy of antique preservation, the thing that brought everyone together, will continue despite the tragedy. Meanwhile, the remaining members of the film crew have largely disappeared from the public eye, struggling with the double shock of losing their close friend Frank Fritz and witnessing their longtime friend Mike Wolfe being convicted of murder. The judge's final words before Mike Wolfe erupted in a courtroom rage now seem almost prophetic. Mr. Wolfe, you presented yourself as a guardian of history and a preserver of American culture, but beneath that facade lay a desire for vengeance and destruction. You used your platform to preach the values of the past while secretly plotting to murder the very man with whom you built that legacy. Moments after the sentence was handed down, Wolfe lunged across the defense table, sparking chaos in the courtroom. It was the last time the public saw him before he was taken away to begin the rest of his life behind bars. However, the story didn't end there. It unfolded into a gripping new chapter that began at a small, secluded cemetery in Iowa, where Frank Fritz had been laid to rest. What was once a quiet, peaceful resting place suddenly became the epicenter of an unprecedented media frenzy. News vans lined the dusty road leading to the cemetery, while antique collectors, history enthusiasts, and curious onlookers gathered behind a hastily erected fence. At the center of it all, a team of specialists began preparations to exhume the grave of Frank Fritz, the beloved co-host of American Pickers, who had died just a year prior. The relocation of the grave was initially thought to be a straightforward process, prompted by the sale of the land to a developer planning to expand a nearby history museum, ironically one of Frank's favorite stops during his treasure hunting days. The Fritz family, though reluctant, agreed to the move on the condition that it be done quietly and respectfully. However, when news of the exhumation leaked to local media, public interest surged, forcing local authorities to step in. Eventually, they permitted limited media coverage of the relocation on the condition that all proceeds from the footage be donated to the Crohn's Disease Research Foundation, a cause close to Frank's heart as he had battled the illness for much of his life. The Fritz family agreed. Frank's sister, Lisa, explained, "Frank never liked making a big deal out of things, but he always wanted to help others in any way he could. I believe he'd be okay with this decision." On the day of the relocation, the sky was clear and cool. Cemetery staff had quietly prepared the site the day before, clearing paths for equipment and erecting barriers around the area to ensure the team of specialists could carry out their work without interruption. It marked the beginning of another somber chapter in the American Pickers story. But this time, there was no laughter, no forgotten treasure waiting to be uncovered, only grief, an unfinished legacy, and a memory being unearthed under the watchful eyes of the world. A seasoned conservator with years of experience handling historical artifacts was brought in to oversee the entire relocation process, ensuring that every step was carried out with the utmost respect for the deceased. "We're following protocols similar to those used when working with historical sites while also honoring the family's wishes," she said. But what Dr. Chambers did not disclose at the time was the startling detail about Frank Fritz's burial, an extraordinary secret only recently revealed. At exactly 8:30 a.m., the granite slab covering the grave was gently lifted by a crane, revealing not a traditional coffin, but a custom-designed artifact chamber beneath. According to Mike Wolfe, who had worked alongside Frank on American Pickers, this was exactly what Frank had wanted. He used to joke all the time that when he died, he wanted to be surrounded by the things he loved, Mike recalled. Most people thought he was kidding, but after his stroke in 2022, Frank started taking everything more seriously. He made it clear in his will that he wanted to be preserved alongside the treasures he cherished throughout his life. When the vault was finally opened, the cemetery fell into a stunned silence, followed by a collective gasp. Inside, surrounding Frank's coffin, were carefully arranged compartments filled with his most prized personal collectibles, many of which had never been seen by the public before. This wasn't just a collection, it was a living legacy, a profound reflection of Frank's deep love for American history. Dr. Chambers, a veteran in the field with decades of experience, couldn't hide her emotion. "In my 20-year career, I've never seen anything like this," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't just a collection. This is history in its most personal and authentic form." Among the many remarkable pieces was a 1934 original Indian motorcycle, once owned by a Midwestern man. Frank had discovered it in a dusty barn in Iowa back in 2019, but he had never shared the find publicly. Experts estimate its value at over $300,000, though its historical and emotional significance is considered priceless. Every item surrounding Frank's resting place told a story, not just of what he collected, but of who he was. Next to the motorcycle was an old wooden box containing personal letters between Thomas Edison and a young female inventor, believed to have contributed ideas to several of his most famous patents. The documents were later authenticated, unveiling the potential to rewrite a part of America's technological history. The discovery left historians stunned, as it shed light on a forgotten collaboration that had remained hidden for over a century. In another corner of the chamber sat a handcrafted toy car collection, each one delicately labeled with the name of a child from the Iowa Children's Hospital. It was revealed that in his final years, Frank had quietly volunteered there, building a small workshop where he taught children how to make vintage-style toy cars as a form of therapy. Each car represented more than just a hobby. It was a memory, a moment, and a bond between Frank and the children he quietly mentored. It painted a portrait of a man who, even in private, never stopped giving. His legacy now forever etched not just in antiques, but in lives touched. But what moved the world most deeply was a small leather-bound notebook embossed with the words, "A True Discovery." Inside, there wasn't a list of high-value items featured on the show. Instead, it held stories. Stories behind the artifacts. Memories of ordinary people who had left a lasting impression on Frank. "The notebook feels like a spiritual legacy," Mike Wolfe said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's a final message Frank left for the world. He didn't just collect antiques, he collected memories. This notebook, this is the real treasure. It's Frank's way of telling us what truly mattered to him." Each page was handwritten, often in Frank's uneven scrawl, filled with warmth, humor, and humanity. It was a window into his heart, a quiet, powerful reminder that behind every item is a life, a story, a connection. And that, more than anything else, was the legacy Frank Fritz wanted to leave behind. News of the discovery spread quickly, causing a social media frenzy. Collectors groups organized memorial events and fundraising efforts to preserve history. The History Channel announced the production of a special documentary titled Fritz's Last Collection, with Mike Wolfe narrating. The Smithsonian Institution and several major museums expressed interest in exhibiting the collection. The Smithsonian proposed a traveling exhibition, American Picker, Frank Fritz's personal collection, which would visit the towns where Frank had lived. "These items don't just belong to Frank," said project director Robert Hensley. "They belong to everyone he ever connected with." The announcement sparked a wave of support from fans, historians, and the general public, all eager to celebrate the man who had dedicated his life to preserving America's forgotten past. And now, through his own collection, was leaving behind a piece of that history for generations to come. The tapestry of memories could only truly be felt when the pieces were placed together. After much consideration, the Fritz family agreed to the exhibition, with the condition that the entire final collection would be permanently housed in a museum in Frank's hometown. Frank had spent his entire life bringing forgotten treasures back into the light, as his sister Lisa Fritz once said. Now they would continue telling the story he so deeply cherished, ensuring his legacy lived on, not just through the items he had collected, but through the lives he had touched and the history he had preserved for all to appreciate. It took experts 3 days to catalog, position, and handle each item along with Frank's personal notes. The entire process was streamed live, accompanied by insightful commentary from historians. The viewership shattered all records for historical content, with a global audience watching every moment unfold. Beyond the artifacts themselves, this experience revealed another side of Frank Fritz, a man who quietly sought out and preserved the forgotten memories of America. And in his final act, he had transformed himself into a living, breathing part of the very collection he had devoted his life to. Through his work, Frank not only curated history, but became an integral part of it, leaving behind a legacy that would continue to resonate for generations. The carefully curated exhibition not only honored the artifacts, but also celebrated the values that Frank Fritz had pursued throughout his life, connecting memories and showing respect for the humble history of America. After the collection was safely relocated, Frank's remains were transported to their new resting place with the utmost reverence. His special coffin was escorted by a procession of classic cars, driven by his close friends and fellow collectors, creating a fitting tribute to a legend. It was a farewell parade like no other, as those who had shared in his journey paid their respects, ensuring that Frank's legacy, his passion for preservation, history, and the bonds he had forged, would live on in the hearts of all who had been touched by his story. The new memorial, designed by Mike Wolfe and the Fritz family, was inspired by the architecture of America's historic streets, a heartfelt tribute to a man who had traveled across the country to preserve the nation's heritage. In the weeks that followed, local museums and historical societies across the United States saw an unprecedented surge in visitors, a phenomenon that the media dubbed the Fritz effect. People who had once been indifferent to history began to rediscover the stories of their own communities. Inspired by the legendary final collection of American Pickers, Frank's leather-bound journals were carefully preserved and digitized, forming the foundation for a new historical initiative. This initiative sought to honor ordinary Americans and the quiet contributions they had made to the country's history. The Fritz effect sparked a cultural awakening, as people nationwide began to realize that history was not just in textbooks, but in their everyday lives, the stories of those who had come before them and the treasures they had left behind. Frank Fritz, in his final act, had created a legacy that transcended artifacts, igniting a deeper appreciation for the forgotten and often overlooked contributions of everyday people to the fabric of the nation. The Fritz Scholarship was also established to support researchers, particularly in rural areas that are often overlooked, to record the history of everyday objects and the people behind them. A year after his passing, Frank Fritz, a man who had dedicated his life to rescuing forgotten antiques, left behind his greatest legacy, a collection that not only preserved history, but also changed the way we view the value of seemingly insignificant things. Each item in the collection was no longer just an object. It had become a story, a memory, a piece of the American soul. Frank's work had reshaped our understanding of what matters, revealing that history is not only found in grand monuments, but in the humble treasures that tell the stories of ordinary lives. His legacy continues to inspire us to see the beauty and importance in the small, often overlooked pieces of the past, and to recognize that every item, no matter how small, has a story worth preserving. Thank you for watching the video. The discoveries from Frank Fritz's estate will surely continue to shock and inspire for many years to come. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on more amazing and surprising stories in our future videos. And don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think about this extraordinary story. The story of Frank Fritz is not just a journey of preserving heritage, but also a profound lesson about the value of memories and the quiet contributions made to history. What he left behind is not just antique items, but an invaluable legacy, a reminder that even the smallest things can carry deep stories about the people and time